Lightning split the sky as the training yard sirens wailed. The gate to the K9 enclosure slammed open, and a massive German shepherd burst into the storm, fur bristling, eyes burning with something wild and desperate. Officers shouted in panic, recruits dove behind barriers, pedestrians scattered as Thor, Seattle's most disciplined police dog, charged through the broken fence like a force of nature unleashed. "Get back! He's dangerous!" someone screamed. But not everyone ran. At the edge of the chaos stood an elderly man with a weathered cane, rain sliding down his wrinkled cheeks. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. He simply watched the dog racing toward him with a look that was not fear, but recognition. "Move!" an officer yelled. What happened next froze everyone in place. The ferocious K9 skidded to a halt, trembling, whining as if he knew the man, knew him from somewhere deeper than memory. Officers stared, stunned. "What is happening?" someone whispered. "Why is he acting like that?" No one there could have imagined that this moment would unravel a secret buried for decades, one that would change the lives of a dog, a handler, and an old man forever. Stay with us, because this story is about to break your heart and heal it all at once. A cold gray morning draped Tacoma's K9 training compound in a thin curtain of mist. The drizzle had not yet turned to real rain, but the air held that familiar metallic heaviness that often precedes a storm. Rows of kennels and training props stood ghost-like in the damp air, siren speakers and riot shields stacked neatly along the fence line, waiting to be used again. Officer Caleb Monroe wiped the moisture from his brow as he tightened the strap on his tactical vest. At 33, Caleb carried the kind of quiet strength that came from years of uncelebrated service. He was tall and rangy, with a square jaw shadowed by dark stubble that never truly disappeared, no matter how closely he shaved. A faint scar ran just above his left eyebrow, a pale line earned during a warehouse raid years earlier. That night, a suspect's wild swing with a metal pipe had nearly ended his career. Since then, the easy, joking patrolman he once was had been replaced by a man who measured every decision twice and hid his worry behind steady, controlled eyes. Today, those eyes were fixed on the German shepherd at his side. Thor, 4 years old, large and powerfully built, stood poised with a stillness that suggested a mind sharper than most humans Caleb had trained. His coat was a deep saddle brown with black streaking down his spine, the fur thick and glossy despite the damp air. His amber eyes held both intensity and an unsettling depth, as if something old lived inside them, something he could not fully name. Thor had always been impeccable, disciplined, calm under pressure, a dog who could charge through smoke or gunfire without flinching. But recently, during training simulations, he would pause mid-command and stare toward the north, toward Seattle, and something beyond the hills. His ears would prick as though hearing a faint echo on the wind, and his breathing would slow into a tense, listening stillness. It unnerved Caleb in a way he refused to admit. They were halfway through a riot simulation drill now. Loudspeakers blasted crowd noises, shouts, panicked screams, the metallic crash of gates slamming shut. Rubber mallets pounded on shields, creating a thunder that echoed off the concrete walls. Trainees in padded gear moved across the drenched field in practiced formations, their boots splashing through shallow puddles. Caleb gave the hand signal. Thor surged forward, weaving through the officers with mechanical precision, eyes focused, body low. Then, mid-stride, the dog suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, head turning toward the distant, unseen north. The leash tightened against Caleb's hand. "Thor," Caleb muttered under his breath, pulling the line just enough to send a clear correction. "Focus." Thor's ears were fully erect now, nostrils flaring, chest rising and falling in sharp, measured breaths. For a few seconds, it was as if the noise of the simulation, the shouts, the pounding, the chaos, had completely vanished for him. There was only that invisible point on the horizon. "Come on, buddy," Caleb whispered, softer this time. Stay here with me." Thor blinked once, almost reluctantly, like someone waking from a dream. Then he resumed the drill, executing the rest of the routine flawlessly. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a brief distraction, but Caleb felt a chill coil in his gut. A dog like Thor didn't break concentration for nothing. When the session finally ended, recruits began clearing equipment, dragging shields and dummies back to the storage shed. The loudspeakers fell silent, leaving only the patter of drizzle against metal and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Caleb walked Thor back toward his kennel row. The kennels were reinforced steel cages lined with rubber flooring, each with a small raised platform and a stainless steel water bowl. The air smelled of wet concrete, shampoo, and dog hair. A young rookie, Evan Clark, moved between the cages with a clipboard in hand. Evan was barely 21, with a dusting of freckles across his nose and a shock of light brown hair that never seemed to lie flat, no matter how he combed it. His blue eyes had a wide, earnest quality, the look of someone who still believed every rule was clear and every mission pure. He carried himself with a clumsy eagerness, desperate to prove useful. "Morning, sir," Evan said brightly when he saw Caleb. "I'm locking up these runs now. Everything looks good." Caleb gave a brief nod, though his attention stayed on Thor. Inside the kennel, Thor paced once, then turned toward the open side of the compound. His nose lifted toward the moist wind drifting in from the bay. His tail stiffened. His ears twitched. There was that look again, like something in the distance was calling his name. Caleb hesitated, a small knot of unease tightening in his chest. He thought of saying something to Evan about double-checking the latches, but a senior officer called his name from across the yard to discuss upcoming duty schedules. Caleb glanced back at Thor one more time, then forced himself to turn away. "I'll be right back," he murmured under his breath, more to Thor than to anyone else. It took only seconds, just a slight distraction, before it happened. Evan, humming to himself, turned to the next kennel down the line. He swung Thor's gate shut with one hand, while marking a box on his clipboard with the other. The latch pressed down, but not all the way. It rested in that dangerous in-between place, appearing closed but not truly locked. Evan had already turned away when a breeze swept across the compound, nudging the door just enough for it to ease open with a soft, metallic creak. Inside the kennel, Thor turned his head sharply. For a heartbeat, he simply stood there, muscles coiled, eyes blazing with a purpose that felt older than any training. The world outside the bars seemed to narrow into a single path leading north. Then he moved. With a powerful thrust of his hind legs, Thor burst through the half-open door, the gate slamming against the side of the kennel with a loud clang. He hit the wet ground at a full sprint, paws kicking up mud, body low to the earth like a missile. "Thor!" Caleb's voice tore across the yard as he spun around, heart lurching into his throat. He saw only a blur of brown and black fur streaking past the rows of cages. "Thor, heel!" The command shattered against the wind. Thor didn't hesitate. He didn't slow or glance back. Years of obedience and discipline were suddenly overridden by whatever invisible thread was tugging at his chest. Two recruits carrying riot shields toward the gate froze in panic as Thor barreled toward them. He darted between them in a flash, shouldering past the half-closed chain-link gate and disappearing into the pale fog that hugged the outer perimeter of the compound. Radios crackled instantly to life. "All units, be advised," a voice barked over the comms. "K9 Thor has escaped the training facility. Last seen heading north toward Seattle. Use caution. Dog is highly trained and may respond aggressively if approached." Caleb didn't wait for orders. He bolted toward the gate, boots slamming against wet pavement, breath burning in his lungs. Fear clawed at him. Not fear of being blamed, not fear of discipline, but something much deeper. Fear that the world outside would not understand Thor the way he did. Fear that someone, somewhere, would see only a weapon off its leash and not the loyal heart trapped inside it. By the time he reached the fence line, Thor was gone. The drizzle had grown heavier, turning the distance into a shifting wall of gray. Caleb grasped the cold metal of the fence, chest heaving, eyes straining to catch any sign of movement in the fog. He saw nothing. Rain beaded on his eyelashes as he stared north toward Seattle, toward a future he suddenly could not control. For the first time in years, Officer Caleb Monroe felt utterly powerless, and in that helpless silence one thought pounded in his mind. Thor wasn't running away from them. He was running toward something that would not let him go. The afternoon at Green Lake Park carried a pale, wintry stillness, despite the rain having finally stopped. Thin veils of mist drifted above the water, blurring the reflections of leaning pines and two quiet rowboats tethered to the dock. The air smelled of wet leaves, cold bark, and distant chimney smoke. On a weathered wooden bench facing the lake sat an elderly man, Harold Pierce. He was in his early 70s, tall for his age, his frame lean yet dignified beneath a long brown wool coat. His white hair, trimmed short, curled slightly at the ends from the damp air, and his skin, pale with sunspots, carried the quiet stories of decades spent outdoors. Harold's face was narrow, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw softened only by time, and his blue-gray eyes were the kind that had once been sharp enough to command a working dog from half a field away. Now they looked gentler, slower, but beneath that softness lay a depth of memory that never fully faded. He rested both hands over the knob of a carved wooden cane, the cane he had made himself after a knee injury during a training accident many years ago. In his other hand lay a paper bag filled with breadcrumbs for the ducks and geese that gathered around him every day. Harold came to this exact spot almost ritualistically, appearing with the punctuality of sunrise, feeding the birds with a soft hum under his breath. To anyone passing by, he was simply an old man enjoying his retirement. No one knew the life he once lived. Harold had served nearly 3 decades as a K-9 trainer for the Seattle Police Department, and during his time, his reputation had become something like folklore among the younger officers. He had been firm but fair, a man who believed dogs learned best not through fear, but through respect and clear affection. His most famous partner, a black and tan German shepherd named Atlas, had been the pride of the K-9 division. Atlas was loyal, determined, impossibly brave, and the closest thing Harold had to family after his wife passed when he was in his mid-50s. The bond between Harold and Atlas was so strong that fellow officers joked the dog listened better to Harold's thoughts than to their commands. But the joke ended the night Atlas died saving a group of hostages. Harold had been there, close enough to hear the gunshot, close enough to hold Atlas in his arms as the dog's breathing weakened. That moment carved open something in him he never fully healed from. He retired soon after, carrying with him Atlas's worn leather collar, the metal tag scratched and faded. He never took it off his person, not once. This afternoon felt like any other until the birds suddenly changed. The ducks stiffened, necks retracting. A cluster of geese hissed and flapped their wings in a panic, scattering over the lake's surface. Harold stopped mid-motion, crumbs still in his hand. His old instincts, dulled but not dead, tightened inside him. He raised his head slowly. From the path that wound along the far edge of the lake, a shape materialized through the mist. A large, soaked German shepherd, its fur darkened from the earlier rain, muscles taut beneath its coat. Thor emerged like a ghost with a heartbeat, moving quickly yet hesitantly, eyes burning with both fear and purpose. His chest expanded sharply as he breathed in the cold air, his steps heavy on the wet pavement. Behind Thor, voices erupted. A woman's sharp cry sliced through the quiet. "That's a police dog! He escaped! Somebody call 911!" A father scooped up his toddler and stumbled backward. A jogger slipped on the wet path trying to run in the opposite direction. Phones came up instantly, screens recording, the air filled with the clamor of fear. Thor let out a low, guttural growl, baring his teeth. Not at Harold, not at anyone specifically, but at the chaos swirling around him. His body bristled, tail rigid, eyes flaring with confusion as the world shrank into noise and motion. But Harold did not move. Slowly, bracing himself against his cane, he rose to his feet. Despite his age, his back stayed straight, as if muscle memory alone held him upright. The crowd parted around him like a split in the fog. Harold's eyes locked onto Thor, not with panic, but with recognition, with an ache that had lived in his chest for years. "Easy, boy," Harold said, his voice deep and warm, steady in a way that surprised even him. Thor stopped mid-step, paws planted on the wet ground. Droplets of water slipped from his whiskers and fell silently onto the pavement. His growl broke into a confused whine. His nose twitched rapidly as if trying to place something impossibly familiar. The world around them seemed to fade. Harold extended his thin, trembling hand, not fully forward, just enough. "That's it. Come on now," he murmured. Thor inhaled a long, shuddering breath, one that reached deeper than scent alone. His ears lowered, his shoulders loosened. He took a step, then another. The crowd collectively held its breath. Harold's eyes glistened as memories surged, Atlas bounding toward him with that same gait, the same earnest intensity. Harold whispered, almost breaking, "I know that smell. You're Atlas's boy, aren't you?" To the onlookers, it felt like a moment torn from folklore. An old man, a runaway K9, and an invisible thread drawn taut between past and present. Thor closed the remaining distance and lowered his head into Harold's outstretched palm as if returning home from a long dream. The wail of sirens shattered the fragile silence around Green Lake as patrol cars swept in from the northern road, their flashing red and blue lights splintering across the rippling water. The mist that had lingered all afternoon caught the lights, like fractured glass, making the entire lakeside shimmer in chaotic color. Officers poured out of their vehicles in rapid formation, some crouched behind open doors, others with hands hovering near their holsters. Among them were veterans whose weary faces tightened with instinct, and rookies whose trembling fingers betrayed their nerves. These men and women braced themselves for a dangerous confrontation, unaware they were moments from witnessing something that would defy every rule in their training manuals. Caleb Monroe was the first to break from the formation. He sprinted down the slope toward the lakeshore, his boots slipping on the wet grass as fear drove him faster than adrenaline ever had. When he finally saw Thor lying calmly beside the elderly man, his breath caught painfully in his chest. His rugged face, shaped by years of hard duty, late-night calls, and the unspoken responsibility of leading a K9 partner, twisted in disbelief. "Sir, step away from the dog," Caleb shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. "He's been classified as dangerous." The elderly man did not flinch. Instead, Harold Pierce lifted his gaze with the serene composure of someone who had already walked through far greater storms. His pale, age-etched face, framed by wisps of white hair, reflected no fear, only a gentle sadness and something deeper, recognition. Slowly, with the care of someone handling a relic, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Several officers tensed, weapons rising a fraction. One rookie, a thin, nervous young man named Daniel Reed with a shaved jawline and freckles dotted across his cheeks, gripped his pistol handle so tightly his knuckles whitened. Daniel had joined SPD only 6 months earlier after losing his older brother, who had died in a traffic collision on duty. The grief had hardened him too quickly, turning caution into fear and fear into reflex. But Harold withdrew nothing threatening. What emerged from his shaking hand was a cracked leather collar, worn soft with time. The metal tag dangling from it glinted faintly in the siren light. Even before Harold held it up fully, several older officers inhaled sharply. Atlas, SPD K9. The name struck the group like a sudden wind. Atlas was a legend in the department, spoken of in quiet tones, with respect reserved only for those who had proven themselves beyond duty. He had saved lives, completed missions deemed impossible, and eventually died in an act of selfless heroism. Harold's voice trembled as he lifted the relic. This belonged to his father. Thor's head rose instantly. His eyes, normally alert and calculating, softened into something wounded and searching. With a slow, deliberate motion, the dog pushed himself closer to Harold, nose twitching uncontrollably as he inhaled deeply. It was more than scent. It was memory. It was blood. It was legacy. A murmur rippled through the officers, disbelief and awe intertwining. "No way," someone whispered. He recognizes it. He's lying down. He's submitting to the old man." One young officer, Sarah Whitfield, a slim woman with dark auburn hair tied tightly at the nape of her neck, lowered her weapon first. Her warm brown eyes widened as she watched Thor rest his massive head against Harold's knee, curling lightly into the old man's side. Sarah had always been soft-spoken, a trait shaped by growing up in a fractured home where loud voices meant danger. Because of that, she read body language better than most, and at this moment she saw no threat, only devotion. "He's hugging him," she murmured. A tremor passed through the watching crowd. Phones were raised, shutters clicked, video streams began broadcasting. By the time additional units arrived, the story was already racing across the internet at hurricane speed. Videos spread from Seattle to Portland, then to Texas, New York, and beyond. Headlines exploded. "Escaped police dog kneels beside elderly man at Green Lake." Did this canine find his father's trainer? Atlas's son, a legacy reborn. Millions watched the footage. Thor, once labeled dangerous, lying still as a child beside Harold's trembling hand, the old collar glimmering between them, comment sections filled with tears and disbelief. "This is the most beautiful thing I've seen online all week," someone wrote. Another added, "Animals remember love even when people forget." That evening, inside the SPD headquarters, Caleb sat alone in the darkened conference room staring at a replay of the video. The glow of the screen reflected off his tired eyes. The grainy footage showed Thor burying his head into Harold's coat, Harold whispering something only the dog could hear. Caleb exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. The man he was watching, the man who had sprinted terrified across the grass, terrified of what could go wrong, felt miles away from the one sitting in the silent room now. He realized the truth wasn't that Thor had escaped. Thor had gone home. And somehow, in a way Caleb had never expected, that journey tied the lives of three beings together, Atlas, Harold, and Thor, and now him as well. The screen froze on an image of Thor's amber eyes gazing upward with childlike trust. Caleb whispered to the empty room, "What were you trying to tell me, buddy?" But only the quiet hum of the building answered. The late April sun had warmed Seattle all morning, painting Lake Union in bright ripples of gold. But as the afternoon grew older, the sky shifted abruptly. Clouds rolled in from the west like heavy gray ships, thick and low, and the wind sharpened with a cold bite. Within minutes, the brightness collapsed into a sudden downpour. Rain hammered the water, the boardwalk, and the sleek roofs of moored sailboats, turning the once calm lakeside into a storm of noise and motion. Caleb Monroe pulled up the hood of his navy jacket, droplets sliding off the brim as he walked alongside Thor. The German Shepherd, now restored to the SPD K9 unit, but viewed with new respect instead of suspicion, trotted confidently at his side. Thor's thick coat was already soaked, the dark patches glistening with rainfall, but he didn't seem bothered. His amber eyes scanned the walkway with the determined calm of a dog reborn, with purpose sharpened as if Harold's presence and Atlas's legacy had awakened something sleeping inside him. Over the past few days, Caleb had changed too. His jaw, usually clenched tight even when he didn't realize it, had softened into something more open. He laughed more, quietly, but genuinely, and during training sessions he no longer barked commands at Thor the way he once did. Instead, he used softer cues, long silences, and moments of stillness, techniques Harold had used in the old footage stored in the SPD archives. Harold himself had visited the precinct twice since the incident, sitting among officers like a living piece of SPD history. He'd shared stories of Atlas, how the dog refused to eat his meals unless Harold sat beside him, how he learned to detect explosives in record time, how he once rescued a missing toddler by following only a single footprint left in the mud. Officers listened as though attending a master class, and even rookies like Daniel Reed leaned forward, absorbing every lesson. That afternoon, Caleb and Thor patrolled the pedestrian path along the eastern edge of Lake Union. Despite the sudden rain, a few people remained near the water, joggers desperate to finish their route, parents trying to hurry their children toward shelter, tourists trapped mid-walk with flimsy umbrellas. The wooden planks of the dock were slick, reflecting the neon signs of waterfront cafes now flickering in the storm. As the rain thickened, the wind sent sheets of water sideways. Caleb looked down at Thor, ready to suggest they loop back toward the cruiser, when a scream sliced through the storm. "Help! Oh my God, my son! He fell!" Caleb jerked his head toward the voice. Near the edge of the lake, a woman in her early 30s, slender, with long black hair plastered against her cheeks, wearing a yellow raincoat that clung to her small frame, was frantically pointing toward the water. Her name, as she later stammered, was Melissa Hart, a Seattle local who had taken her son out for a walk before the weather turned. She had tired brown eyes, faintly shadowed, as though she had spent many nights comforting a restless child or juggling too many responsibilities. Her panic now made her movements frantic and uncoordinated. Caleb sprinted toward her. "Where? There! Melissa cried. In the churning gray water, a small figure flailed, a boy, maybe 6 years old, his red jacket ballooning around him, tiny hands clawing helplessly at the surface. The fall must have been quick. The slippery stone ledge offered no grip. Before Caleb could issue a single command, Thor exploded forward. His paws splashed through puddles, sending water flying in every direction. The German Shepherd reached the ledge in seconds, barking loudly 3 times. Sharp, purposeful barks meant to mark location for rescuers. Thor then leaned over the edge, lowering his chest dangerously close to the water. Rain smashed into his back, but he pushed forward, eyes locked on the thrashing child. "Thor, wait!" Caleb shouted, instinctively reaching for the leash. But it was too late. Thor braced his hind legs, dug his claws into the stone, and lunged partway into the lake. He clamped his jaws carefully, instinctively, around the collar of the boy's jacket. The child's screams mingled with the roar of rain as Thor pulled inch by inch, his muscles straining with controlled power. His eyes stayed wide and alert, focused only on keeping his grip gentle enough not to harm, but strong enough not to fail. "Easy, easy, boy," Caleb yelled, sliding onto his knees beside him. "Stay, Thor, pull slowly." Together, man and dog hauled the child up onto the wet pavement. The boy collapsed forward, coughing violently, water spilling from his mouth. Melissa dropped to her knees, sobbing as she gathered him into her arms. Ethan, sweetheart, breathe, breathe." Thor stepped back, panting, shaking water from his fur. His tail wagged once, small, hesitant, as though afraid to intrude on their moment. Melissa reached out with a trembling hand and touched the top of his soaked head. Thank you, baby. Thank you so much." Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The world narrowed to the sound of the storm and the soft, grateful cries of a mother holding her child. A tourist who had sheltered under a nearby awning lowered her phone, having captured the entire rescue. She whispered to her friend, "That's the same dog from the Green Lake video." Within minutes, the footage would explode online, adding another chapter to Thor's unexpected rise from dangerous runaway to symbol of raw, untrained heroism. Caleb knelt beside Thor, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. "You weren't born to attack," he murmured. "You were born to protect." Thor leaned into him, eyes half closing, rain falling like a curtain around them as they sat beside the trembling family on the soaked walkway, two protectors bound by instinct, fate, and a legacy they were only beginning to understand. The morning of the ceremony at the Seattle Police Department arrived with rare clarity. Sunshine stretched across Elliott Bay, painting the water in shifting stripes of gold and pale blue, while a cool breeze swept inland and fluttered the flags mounted along the precinct's entrance. Officers, both seasoned veterans with graying temples and new recruits, still stiff in their uniforms, filed into the main auditorium, their voices hushed with reverence. News of Thor's rescue at Lake Union had spread across the city, and as a result, this small ceremony had grown into something far more meaningful than anyone expected. On stage stood Harold Pierce, fragile but dignified. Time had carved deep lines across his face, but beneath the thinning white hair and frail hands lay the unmistakable presence of someone who had shaped generations of K9 handlers. He wore a simple charcoal suit, slightly loose around the shoulders, and leaned on his wooden cane for balance. Beside him sat Thor, fur brushed to a shine, posture upright, wearing a newly awarded K9 medal that gleamed under the overhead lights. The sight of the old man and the once runaway dog standing together drew a quiet ripple through the room. Caleb Monroe stood a few feet behind them, hands clasped behind his back. His usually stern expression carried something softer today: pride, gratitude, and perhaps a shade of awe. Since the rescue at Lake Union, Thor had become something of a symbol, not of danger or unpredictability, but of instinctive protection, and Caleb, standing there in dress uniform, felt strangely humbled to be part of Thor's journey. When the room finally fell silent, Harold approached the podium. He moved slowly, each step careful but steady. His blue-gray eyes swept the audience, then dropped briefly to Thor's watchful face. With a soft breath, he began to speak. "People think dogs remember commands," he said, his voice low but resonant. "But commands fade. What stays with them, what becomes their true compass, is how they are loved, how they are taught to trust, how they are treated when no one is watching." A hush spread over the auditorium. Young officers leaned forward, older ones bowed their heads. Everyone seemed to recognize the truth in his words. Caleb's gaze drifted to Thor, who was still as stone, with ears perked. The dog's amber eyes glimmered with something deep, understanding, perhaps, or simply the echo of generations. Harold continued, "We shape them, but they shape us too. Loyalty isn't born of fear, it's born of the quiet moments, the touches, the patience, the gentleness. And if you teach a dog with love, that love will outlive you. It will carry on in ways you can't imagine." Applause rose slowly, respectfully, like a tide. Some officers wiped their eyes discreetly, but Harold's time, though celebrated that morning, was quietly running out. Over the next weeks, his health declined. His steps grew shorter, his voice thinner. Until one cold evening, as Seattle's early winter crept in, Harold collapsed in his small apartment and was rushed to Harborview Medical Center. The hospital room was modest: white walls, humming machines, a single narrow window framing the city lights outside. Harold lay on the bed, skin pale as parchment, chest rising unsteadily beneath thin blankets. Thor refused to leave his side. The nurses, at first hesitant, quickly learned that Thor's presence helped more than hindered. Whenever Harold's breathing wavered, Thor would lift his head and press his muzzle against Harold's arm, and the monitors would stabilize. Even the attending physician, a stern man named Dr. Elias Porter, with silver-streaked hair and dark, thoughtful eyes, admitted that Thor seemed to be performing his own kind of medicine. Dr. Porter had seen hundreds of final moments in his career, but even he paused the first time Harold whispered, "Easy, boy. I'm still here." And Thor laid his head gently onto the blankets. Late one night, with the lights dimmed and the city wind rustling faintly against the window, Harold called Caleb closer. His hands trembled as he rested them on Thor's head, fingers sliding through the thick fur. Caleb leaned down, the faint scent of antiseptic surrounding them. "Teach them with your heart," Harold murmured, "not just your voice." He paused, breath catching. "And remember, loyalty doesn't die. It only moves from one soul to the next." A few minutes later, Harold Pierce passed, with Thor's weight warm against his legs and Caleb standing silently beside him. The dog did not move for a long time, as though listening for a heartbeat he didn't want to admit was gone, and when he finally lifted his head, his eyes carried something older, heavier, but not broken, something like inheritance. 1 year later, spring returned to Seattle with soft breezes and gentle light. Trees around Green Lake swayed with new leaves, and ducks glided lazily across the water's surface. Caleb, dressed in a light jacket instead of uniform, walked slowly along the familiar path. Thor, now calmer and wiser, padded beside him with a dignified stride that matched his spirit. They reached the old wooden bench. Its surface was newly polished, and a bronze plaque gleamed under the sunlight. "Harold Pierce, the man who taught hearts to obey." Thor stepped forward and placed his front paws gently onto the bench, lowering his head to nuzzle the plaque. His tail swayed slowly, tenderly, in a way that felt like a greeting and a farewell. Caleb smiled, laying a warm hand on Thor's back. "Let's go, partner," he said softly. "Your old teacher's watching over us." Man and dog walked forward together, their shadows stretching long across the sunlit path, an unbroken thread of loyalty weaving into the world before them. In the quiet echo of Harold's memory and the steady footsteps of Thor and Caleb walking into a new dawn, we are reminded of something far greater than coincidence. Some call it fate, others call it instinct, but many of us, we call it a miracle. For in moments when life feels heavy, when loss breaks us or fear blinds us, God often sends reminders, not in thunder, not in burning bushes, but in simple, ordinary miracles. A loyal dog who chooses to protect, an old man whose love outlives his own heartbeat, a stranger who shows kindness without expecting anything in return. These are the quiet ways God speaks into our everyday lives, whispering that loyalty still exists, that love leaves footprints long after we're gone, and that the bonds we build on earth do not end. They only change form. And maybe, just maybe, Thor wasn't only following instinct. Maybe he was following the path God laid before him, guiding him back to the man who once held his father's heart. A reminder to all of us that no love is ever lost, and no act of kindness is ever forgotten in heaven. If this story touched you today, if you felt even the smallest spark of hope, if you believe miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four paws, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. And may God bless you, your family, and every loyal companion He places in your life. May His protection follow you the way Thor followed the call of his heart, faithfully, bravely, endlessly.